There is only one series this season that I think can compete for Anime of the Year with Freyrin, and that anime is the Apothecary Diaries. This anime is amazing as it stands currently. I don't personally like it more than Freyrin, but I do think that this anime is incredible, and by the end of the second core, it could very well surpass Freyrin. But right now, it's just slightly behind. This series does so much right, and that is what makes it incredible. The original source material was already amazing, giving us a great story and good characters, but the anime has taken that story and enhanced it tremendously. One of my favorite things about this anime is just how funny it can be. There are some more serious moments in this anime which I will talk about more later, but this anime just has great comedy, and I think that mostly comes down to two things. The first one being the chemistry between all of the characters. They all get along in a way that makes their interactions hilarious. The other thing is Mao Mao herself. She's just funny and she doesn't take shit from anyone, which just makes her character even better. This series doesn't really tell jokes, which I'm glad about because anime isn't really the best at that most of the time. It really is just the interactions that all of the characters have with each other that makes the series so funny. But on a more serious note, I want to talk about some of the themes the series covers outside of its comedic moments. And one of those themes is death. Death plays a massive role in this story considering this is a story about an apothecary that isn't too surprising. But this series takes it a step further. You can honestly see how death affects everybody in this series. We see a mother lose her son, children lose their parents, we even see people who take their own lives or are murdered. Death surrounds everybody in this series, but Mao Mao handles it really well and delivers a line that blew me away the first time I heard it. At the end of episode 9, Mao Mao runs into a servant who drowned in the palace moat. From there, we can see her for the first time being visibly uncomfortable, but she is able to do her job and relay her findings and her thoughts to Jinshi. But then she starts thinking about her own death, about when it'll happen, how it'll happen. And then she asks Jinshi a very hard thing for him to hear, which is that if she makes a mistake and has to be executed, she wants him to make sure it is done by poison. She is completely rational and calm in this interaction, and the coldness of the line is very unnerving. But after she explains why she said it, you completely understand where it came from. This line and the one just before it about how people don't get to choose their own death are extremely powerful lines that really make you wonder what kind of life Mao Mao has lived up to this point to be able to utter these lines with such a calm and rational demeanor. We see a lot of people in this series struggling with things to the point where they feel like death is their only way out. That feeling is executed so well in this series, and just like everything else in this series, it makes you feel for the characters going through these struggles and makes you hope they can come through it. And as for the ones that didn't make it past that point, it makes you wonder what could have been done to prevent something like this from happening in the future. This series does a really good job at getting you invested in even the most minor of characters and gets you to feel for them, which I absolutely love. Alongside talking about death, this series also talks about disease naturally, as again, this series is about an apothecary and it does a good job at this. It doesn't go in depth on a lot of what the series is talking about in terms of what disease someone has, but they do explain symptoms and medications that can be used to help with them, which is pretty cool. This series also talks about food-related illnesses, which I think is pretty cool to talk about as well, as it isn't really something that most anime like to talk about. There are so many things this series talks about that makes it super interesting and fun to watch that it makes the whole anime better. Speaking of things like that, another thing that they talk about but not too in depth, but in depth enough that it's interesting, is different types of medications and poisons used for different purposes. This series, like with diseases, doesn't go super in depth on any medications Mao Mao makes or the poisons she tests, but it does bring up a lot of interesting things about them that is still quite fun to see her discovering and making new things. After all the darker things this series discusses, I thought I would talk about one of the better and lighter things that this series does, which is that it explores compassion in its own unique way. Mao Mao is very blunt with her words and doesn't hold back, even with someone who would traditionally be above her in status. She speaks her mind, and that sometimes does get her into trouble and has made her some enemies as well. But you can see that despite her words and the way she acts around people and the things she does, she deeply cares about human life and tries her absolute best to make sure her patients survive, even if she has to get violent to get her point across to some people. Compassion is usually shown through language and how someone speaks alongside their good deeds, but with Mao Mao, she doesn't need to pretend to be nice with her words to show compassion through nothing but her actions alone. She shows compassion to those around her, which I absolutely love about this anime, and it makes Mao Mao's character so much more interesting. There is one thing this series does a really good job at exploring that I don't think a lot of people even think about, and that is that society pushes women to pursue beauty for the sake of getting the man they want. They are constantly berated about how their beauty is fleeting and how they need to strike while they are still young. We even see how far a lot of people go to achieve beauty. This series talked about something in passing in a scene once about foot binding, and if you don't know what that is, you're lucky because holy crap is it gross. But back in the day in China, it was seen as something beautiful, so many women would permanently destroy their bodies for the sake of this beauty. And the Apothecary Diaries even talks about what's going in the opposite direction. Mao Mao is a pretty good looking lady when she gets dolled up, and she knows this, but she doesn't really care about pursuing beauty in the way most women around her do. So she actually sabotages her chances of getting a man through traditional means by deliberately painting face freckles on her face with makeup to make herself appear less desirable. And I think it is super interesting that the series explores this topic the way it does by having our female lead not be into traditionally female things. But to all the female viewers out there, you can let me know if you think I'm right. Of course, I'm just reading into this, but as a man, I don't really know what you guys go through on a daily basis, so you guys can let me know down in the comments if you think I am right at all about this, and if I'm not, please correct me in the comments. I am more than willing to learn about this, I just don't really know much, because I'm ignorant. The Apothecary Diaries can get very political in its story, which I guess isn't too surprising considering the setting of the series being in a palace, but there are a lot of different games we see being played in every episode by the consorts and their ladies-in-waiting. It is pretty interesting to see the lengths some of these women will go for a little Emperor D. We also see some of the policies of the palace being carried out by Jinshi. In certain ways, things are done to ensure everything in the palace runs smoothly. I like that we get to explore all of these aspects of the series as it allows us to get more invested in the world and the characters of the story, which overall is just great. The Apothecary Diaries is gorgeous from every measure you can think of for an anime. The scene direction in this anime especially is so well done, and it just makes me gush literally every single episode. It is honestly pretty damn impressive how well shot this anime is. The animation is also really good. There aren't a whole lot of action or high movement scenes in this anime, but it is really well animated on the subtle things, and you can tell there was a lot of care put into making this anime. The lighting as well works really well. There are so many scenes in this series where I am floored by how they can look so good strictly by how they drew the lighting in the scene. It just makes every scene so gorgeous. Even the regular scenes are really well done and look gorgeous. Next up we have the music, and my god is the music for this anime so good. Every track on the OST fits so well with the series and each scene they are used in. The OP is gorgeous and gets you ready for a new episode of the show, and the ED is beautiful and really gets you to sit there and just appreciate everything the show has to offer. The whole soundtrack for this anime is amazing and makes you really appreciate all the love and care that was put into this anime to make it as good as it is. Alright, and we can finally talk about all the characters in this anime. I've already talked a fair bit about Mao Mao, so I won't go into too much detail here, but she is such a great protagonist and is such a great dichotomy to how this series presents the rest of its characters. She is also super intelligent and funny, which enhances the series a lot. Jinshi is a character I love a lot. He is a perfect dichotomy of Mao Mao. Unlike Mao Mao, who doesn't take much of anything seriously unless it involves poisons or medicines of some kind, Jinshi is a pretty hard worker. But he starts to neglect his work a little bit to mess around with Mao Mao, as teasing her seems to be a pastime of his. I love the relationship Mao Mao has with Jinshi. Right now it is just a really good friendship where they take care of each other and trust each other's judgment, but they also know how to call each other out if they need to. But this relationship is definitely evolving into something more. I don't know if it'll lead to romance, as Mao Mao doesn't really seem all that interested in romance, but we will see what the future holds for these characters. I like all of the consorts a lot. Each one of them has a really unique personality that makes them each stand on their own. Their personalities also match their colors so well. Gyokyo is unsurprisingly my favorite, but that is because she is the most developed, as she is the one Mao Mao directly works for, so we see her the most. But I like the others as well. Leah is very smart, but has dumb people working for her. She is also fairly kind and appreciates hard work. She is also pretty tragic, having been the consort that we see at the very beginning of the series who loses her son. But she is able to recover from that, and we see her recovery happen in real time in the series. Duo is the hottest. I mean, what? I didn't say anything. She is probably the most tragic of the consorts, as she had to live a life she never really wanted, and after losing her son, she clung on to what little she had left until she was eventually taken out of the palace. But she is a very headstrong and smart woman who is very compassionate towards the people who follow her. I wish we got to see more of her character, as she is super interesting and her personality is awesome. Li Shu is just a kid, and she acts exactly like a kid should act. She isn't spoiled despite her position. She is actually in the worst position out of all the consorts, and she doesn't even have the trust of the people who are supposed to be closest to her. But she still tries to be bright and cheery and live her life with a smile, which I respect a lot. She isn't the smartest person around, but she is very kind and understands pain very well. The other side characters in the series are great as well. The ladies in waiting are all super well written. Some can be assholes, but what do you expect when they want what's best for the lady they serve, even if they're ignorant about certain things. There's also this one servant girl who Mao Mao has a great relationship with, and seemingly eats with fairly often. It is honestly a pretty cute friendship to see them have, and Mao Mao always gives that girl the goods, so that is really cool too. It is just nice that Mao Mao has a friend around her own age in the palace who she can talk to and hang out with. The Apothecary Diaries is an amazing anime that I can find literally no fault with. It has amazing characters, a super interesting and compelling story, and is just gorgeous. This anime couldn't be better if it tried, and I respect that.